Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Active Travel Cafe. I'm Roxanne. I am your host this evening, and I am delighted to welcome our old friends, Mark from City Infinity and Robert Weetman, here to talk about some work they've been doing for living streets on where have I gone? On being realistic and radical, how to create pedestrian-friendly side road junctions. But before we get to that, we're here for your news. So who has got a little bit of news for us today? H, we've had a bit of news for you, so I'm going to go to Bob first. Bob, what's your news today?
Hi there. My news is you may know that there's a budget next week, and we've got a web post on why we think the price of motoring should be increased. And it's an open letter to Rachel Reeves, which she probably won't take any notice of, but everybody else should. So I'll just put the link in the chat. And those of you who tried before to get on it, there were some problems, but you should be able to read through the whole thing now. And if you want a PDF or whatever, just email me through the RDRF website. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And hopefully someone's also writing to Rachel Reeves about the cycling to work allowances as well. There's not been some great comments in the media about those. Will, what's your news? Will, you're...
There you go.
Yep.
Basically, outside of Colchester Cycling Campaign, I joined a group of other people to see if Essex County Council would consider going over to area-wide 20's plenty in light of a huge success in Wales. They came back with a completely off-the-wall reply that involved going to their local highways forums, which were about 12 or 14 little forums with very limited budgets, which apparently aren't accepting anything anyway. And they also said, if it's a matter of speeding, contact the police. They were so totally, kind of flippant by it. And they're relying on a speed strategy from, I think, 2009, 2010. It's really ancient. It doesn't include any updates since then. So anyway, we put together, after their letter and reply, we had a bit of argy-bargy back and forth, and we've reported them to the Ombudsman. And I'll put the link in the chat so that people can find that. Okay.
Okay, well, let us know how you get on with the Ombudsman. Mark, a bit of news from you.
Yes, and I hope Bob won't be cross at me using the following term, but it's Road Safety Week, not Road Danger Week, which it should be, but it is Road Safety Week. So anyone who's doing anything locally, and that might be relevant to what you're working on. I'm out tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock doing a speed watch session. I don't know if anyone else is doing anything.
Okay, thank you. H, what's your news for us today?
Right, two things. One, in the hospital, I'm having a great deal of informal interviewing with staff and visitors, how they get to the hospital. And I'm finding out some people are actually driving barely 2 miles to the hospital, then taking 20 minutes to get in and out the car park, which seems ridiculous. But they're locked into this. It's quite amazing that the data I'm collecting there. And I'm trying to influence them, persuading them to get the new Voy bikes, which we've now got. And we've had 150% more electric bikes, EAPCs, in Glasgow with the new fleet, because they've now launched 1,000 bikes in Glasgow. I know that the original Next Bike fleet, they were getting about 2 to 3 times as many hires of the EAPC as they were of the regular bikes. So that looks promising. The pricing's good. The only thing that's quite interesting is they changed the batteries on these, and there's an interesting logistics. I know the guy who's going around changing the batteries, because they're employing cycle logistics companies to change the batteries. And it'd be quite interesting to see how this works out. He says it's a bit overtaxing because you can only get 40 replacement batteries in a van, but you might be able to do the same on a cargo bike. So it's an interesting logistic.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Any other news from anybody else today?
If I may, just come in on the back of what H was saying.
Okay.
I think there's a big age gap in the people who are using electric bikes and using electric scooters. It's basically the under 40s, and it's tailing off between the 30s and the 40s. And the 50s and the 60s, unless they cycle already, aren't doing it. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity there for people to go to fetes, bazaars, or even organise events on pieces of in car parks on a Sunday, where people can try these bikes. But it's up to the companies, Voy and Dot and people like that, to actually do that. But there's tremendous opportunity there.
Can I just come back there, because I am actually using my bus pass to hire cars and also hire bikes. It's possible to use an ITSO card, an RFID card, to hire the bikes. And so I've been trying to get the idea that the pensioners' bus pass, not only does it get them a free bus ride, but it also gets them a bike hire. And that can be used for a population health study, because you know how often the pensioner is hiring a bike and using it, and you offer them a health check depending on how often they've used the bike. So it becomes a sort of integrated situation.
Okay, thank you. Tim, your news.
Two things. One is my 35-year-old daughter, who hasn't ridden for years, used the Leicester borrow a bike for a month e-bike scheme, panicked towards the end of the month because how would she get to work, even though I've been driving her there and back half a mile each day, and has bought a bike, £300 off thanks to the scheme, £100 off because the guy was nice, paid 200 quid for it. This week was Storm Melissa, or whatever it was, and she was thrilled because she's bought all the gear and she got to ride on Friday in weather that made me blanch, and yeah, had a great time. On collecting batteries, when Leicester had a e-bike scheme, we didn't borrow a diesel truck to move the bikes around. We bought the Beast, which was a three-wheeler electric bike chariot thing with a huge metal platform, and it could shift 6 bikes at a go. Somebody, the scheme manager, pedaled around collecting bikes and moving them from dock to dock. So there you go. Don't need it.
Great, thanks, Tim. Right, that will wrap up our news session. I will just do one little piece of news from Cambridge. Not sure how far the news has travelled yet, but we've got more change in the CamCycle team. Our wonderful infrastructure campaigner Josh is leaving us to move to Oxford. And so we will likely be recruiting for yet another role in our team in the coming weeks or months. So keep an eye out for that. I'll pop a little bit of the news in our in the chat there. But yes, I promise that the 2 departures of 2 staff members, not related at all, just unfortunate timing, that will be all shifting places at the same time. Anyway, that is the end of our news session. And now that I'm a bit warmed up, hopefully a little less tongue-tied. So let's try this introduction again. We are delighted today to be joined from Mark Phillpotts from design consultancy City Infinity, and we also know him as Ranty Highwayman, and Robert Weetman, freelance specialist on street design and member of the Living Streets team. They are going to present realistic and radical how to create pedestrian-friendly side road junctions. And you're all in for a treat today because we're essentially getting 2 full presentations in one here. So we're going to do it in 2 parts so you can get your questions in the middle and at the end. So we'll be led by Mark for the first half, led by Robert for the second half, but keep your questions coming in the Q&A and we'll see how far we get. Mark, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. As it turns out, this is actually the first time I've presented anything to do with work at this. It's all been opinions. So yes, holding myself up to be scrutinised for a change. So I'm going to steer to start with, and let's see how we go with this. So yeah, well, you know me from a lot of talking here, but I'm actually coming at this tonight as a freelance design engineer, hopefully bringing my over 30 years of experience to the table. But I'll let you be the judges, and I'll just invite Robert to say a few words at this point.
Yeah, so many people know me from my work with Living Streets. I'm part-time, I work part-time with Living Streets. I'm also freelance part-time, so that's why it gets a little bit difficult to introduce me. Mark, if we move on to the next slide. So what we're going to give you is a session which is based on introducing some work that Mark and I have been doing in a very close collaboration between the two of us for Manchester City Council. And to be clear, the views you will hear are our own and not theirs tonight. The work is thinking about how side road junctions could be made better. It's really interesting work. We've had to develop whole new kind of concepts as we've gone along. You know, some of the work we were doing didn't have ideas to hand. We've had to kind of name things and create new concepts. We've also had to link this work in with ideas like Vision Zero, safe systems approaches, and so on. And some of it might be interesting for you. We may not necessarily be saying exactly what you would expect. Next slide, Mark. But first, kind of before we go on to that, we want to just start to get you to think about what we mean when we're talking about priority junctions. Next slide. So it's something like this, priority junctions, something like this. Next slide, Mark. What we're talking about is junctions with the side road junctions, priority junctions. There isn't really a nice term that entirely captures this, because we're talking about junctions which have got a marked priority, you know, where there's a giveaway lines or a stop line, but also unmarked junctions, and we'll come back to that maybe a little bit later. Essentially what that means is all the kind of junctions that we've got out there that aren't signalized and aren't roundabouts. So for the moment, we'll just call those priority junctions. Mark.
Right. In a minute, I'm going to invite people to throw things into the chat, and hopefully, Robert, you can keep a quick eye on that and perhaps call a few common things out just for a couple of minutes. But yeah, I guess I just want to go through a few of my rogues gallery photos of what are we getting wrong, and it doesn't need me to go through the detail every single one here. So I'll just pick out one or two things as I go here. So, I mean, obviously here, it's horrendous for anybody to try and cross this side road. And of course, an Audi driver has parked opposite the other drop curb. Here's another crossing here. We've given people at this entrance to a side road. I think that's a hubcap sitting in the middle of that pedestrian refuge for somebody to trip over, but it's horrible. This one's even crazier. Bob, it's up in your neck of the woods. You might recognize it. Yeah, people dropping off in the entrance to the side road. And this side road is so big, it's got its own, almost own country there in the middle. And here's another bizarre one that I saw even just last week, where if you're trying to cross from those two sides of this crossing, how on earth can you see and be seen there? So pretty crazy. So just over to you all for a couple of minutes. So based on kind of the stuff we've seen and the stuff you've seen out and about, what do you think we should be doing for side roads? A couple of minutes, throw stuff into the chat, please. I can't see anything, just my screen, so I'm reliant.
I'll read some out, Mark. So we've got shortening crossing distances, continuous footways, redesign them, copy the Dutch, sharper geometry, change the corners, prioritize the pedestrian, working with local disabled and pedestrian campaigners to work out what's needed where. Continuous pavement, shorter distances, sharper corners, remove traffic. Pedestrians remain level, cars change level. Think about the blind, mandatory daylighting, cycling by design template, zebras without the lights.
Right. I think we're getting quite a few things that might pop up again in a minute. So thanks for all that. Let's have a look at a couple of things as we go along then. So again, not really asking for answers here. This is just something to stick in your heads and maybe to the Q&A a bit later. But should we paint side road zebras everywhere? This is one in Westminster. I think they have their place. Robert will go through something a bit later where we might be able to place them within a model we've developed. I don't think you could put them everywhere because of all sorts of reasons. Someone mentioned continuous treatments, Walden Forest Claxon, of course. Yes, again, they've got their place, I think, or we think, but they're not the answer absolutely everywhere. So they're there in the mix. So let's see where we get to in the second half of this. So I think it's worth saying that, especially in the UK, there isn't decent guidance on this. There's lots of bits of guidance that doesn't really go into the depth that we've had to for this project. And we love to experiment. So here's something. It's got a side road entry treatment. There's a speed table there. We've got the tactile paving. This happens to be shared with cycling. We can debate that separately, but it's just a bit of an experiment. Here's another one elsewhere. Okay, but this is for the cycle crossing here. Green stripe across the road, telling people they've got priority, in conflict maybe with the curb lines, yellow lines. Maybe it's not so clear. Here's something a little bit weird and wonderful. Here's a no priority junction, as you'll know to love them in a minute. But they haven't really bothered about providing drop curbs or tactile paving. Here's our old friend up in Coventry, which again, is great, does a good job, but maybe it's not quite there yet. So lots of different experiments. Here's a road that's been closed. We've still got the side road going on there, but it's maybe getting towards what we might want in some situations. And yeah, try and unpick where you're meant to cross it. As a pedestrian, you're crossing on those green stripes, which are not zebra crossings, and you've got 1, 2, 3 little roads to cross there. Okay. You can put your hand up if you like. I'm not going to count them, but who has read the Highway Code recently? The Highway Code was changed, I think it's 2022, to introduce this new rule. There's a whole load of rules about hierarchy, and there's some hands going up. And this rule says that anybody turning into or out of the side road, you have to give way to the pedestrian. Those with a keen eye for tactile paving will realise that red tactile paving for this type of crossing is wrong. It should be buff, but don't worry about that. So if I move on, who's going to take the hand down? Who's only read the Highway Code to argue with people on social media? This is Rule 170. We've had it for a very long time. Rule H2 kind of reinforces that. And again, this is about you give way to people crossing or about to cross the side road. Do notice in this government document, they haven't bothered to put in drop curbs or tactile paving. So over to Robert for the next bit.
So we think those highway code rules make sense, at least in theory. It would seem that that's what we're going to need in order that we have streets that pedestrians can easily navigate. But it seems unlikely that we're going to get proper kind of driver behaviours according to that set of rules just because they're written down in a book, which people very rarely read. And it will be design that is required in order to make people change their behaviours. So we have, we have taken that highway code, those highway code rules as a really, really useful starting point for trying to work out for Manchester, and we think actually for the wider world, what it is that good looks like. And a way we've done that is to start to divide things to boil things down into 3 key scenarios, which are a set of conditions under which drivers become, because of design, likely to obey those highway code rules about giving way to a pedestrian crossing the end of a side road. Secondly, a set of conditions where drivers become unlikely to obey those highway code rules. And thirdly, a set of conditions where drivers become unable to obey those highway code rules. So we've taken those ideas as a kind of starting point for developing a much bigger set of ideas for Manchester about what's required. Now, I think we were going to give you a chance to ask us some questions at this point. So let's have a go at that. And Mark, you can't see the chat, can you?
No, if people perhaps keep these 3 conditions, if you like, or 3 scenarios in their head. Yeah, we'll have a few minutes for some questions before we delve a little bit deeper. I will stop sharing now, so I can come in on the chat as well. I don't know if we've had anything formally in the Q&A, but I don't know if I can see that. Can I? Yes, I can.
Bear with me, I'll get the Q&A up. No, there's nothing in the Q&A yet. People are using the chat to talk.
So all in the chat. So, okay, fine. Let's have a quick look at that. Probably go to the end and scroll backwards if we can. Yeah, so look, there's some interesting things coming in there. So going back to one of the slides I showed, there's a point been made about having WL lines going round the entrance to the junction, making it look like drivers have priority. So there's lots of design cues that consciously or unconsciously give people a feeling of whether they have priority or not. So that's quite an important thing to pick up. I'm not going to mention individual locations because people are not there to defend themselves, but people talking about different types of footway treatment, whether they truly are giving people design priority, as we'd call it, across the footway there. Interesting point. I mean, this always comes up about copying the Dutch, and in copying the Dutch, we'll reveal some of it a bit later, but there's a very detailed and nuanced system that sits behind this. So it's not a case of finding something we like the look of and dropping it down at every single location. So we need to be very careful with that.
Mark, I've got a couple of questions on the end of the chat, or a couple of comments.
Yeah, go on, Robert.
So from Martin, Martin's asking, have we considered cyclists turning in and out, and what conditions impact on their ability to follow the highway code rules? We have thought a lot about cycling in the work we've done. Actually, what's been really interesting is thinking about the way that infrastructure that's intended to support cycling can either add to the pedestrian friendliness, the level of pedestrian friendliness for a junction, or actually can also detract from the level of pedestrian friendliness. And that's perhaps not in the ways that you would most obviously think, but more about the geometry of a junction and the way that can change how a driver will behave. But that's probably enough of that for the moment. We've also, Mark, got Liz saying, I'm not ready to ask a question yet. I need to hear some more.
No, fair enough. Well, if there's nobody actually burning our doors down, shall we move on to the next bit then and keep?
I'll just check and say, because we're sort of going on a slightly different format, if anyone was waiting for that big here's your moment to ask questions moment, here it is. So if there is anything burning that you've not put in the Q&A feature, now is your moment. Otherwise we'll move on to the next half, and I'm sure if anything comes up from the first half, we can still deal with it in our second round of questions.
Yeah,
right.
You have a hand up there. Do you want to go to H's question?
Okay,
Yeah.
quick one there, H, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for to type on this from leaning up on the desk. So just a thought is the type of junction where people swing in. I'm thinking more in terms of a bridge rather than the pedestrian getting in the way. We've had probably at least 3 or 4 bridge crashes on Cook Street in Glasgow. It's banned to double-deck buses, but they still manage to drive around the corner because it's a lazy turn. It's so easy to make that turn, and then you sort of feel it. So do you feel that the high-speed flare on a junction tempts people to come in too fast?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and yeah, the geometry in lots of detail will come up in a bit. So yeah, okay. So Robert will now present, and I will try and start the chat from my end.
So I've shared my screen there, and I'm showing you an image that that if you've read our blogs on this work, you will already have seen, but I'm going to talk briefly through it. So this is an image which we're using really to sit at the heart of the work we've been doing, and I'll just explain it. It's a little bit like a kind of chart where the blue wedge represents at its widest end, at the left-hand end of the diagram, very good conditions for pedestrians. And at the right-hand side of that diagram, where the wedge goes down to a point, very, very poor conditions for pedestrians. So it's like a kind of a scale. And to the left of the central line we've put there are conditions which we are defining as being conditions which are good enough to be called pedestrian friendly. And that corresponds to what we were just saying, which is about a design where the design and the traffic conditions together mean that drivers are likely to obey the highway code rules about giving way to a crossing pedestrian. Whereas to the right of that vertical line, we've got conditions which are not quite as good, or to the far right, really bad for pedestrians, which we're defining as being a standard design. That standard design covering a spectrum which goes from the better end, which is what we've called compromise design, through to the worse end for pedestrians, which we're calling flow-focused design. And again, defining the compromise design as being a situation where drivers are unlikely to obey the highway code rules. So that's pretty much, that's the kind of almost the standard common British junction design. through to the worst end for pedestrians, which is the point at which the whole environment means that drivers become unable to obey those highway code rules. And if you want, you can think about stuff that's moving on towards being something like a motorway slip road, which is still a kind of priority junction, but it's a kind of design where, you know, we've got very large vehicles traveling very quickly, and it becomes, you get to the point where it becomes impossible for a driver to stop halfway through making a turn. And then conceptually, as part of this diagram, we've got the purple wedge, which starts with no pedestrians being excluded at the point of that vertical line, going all the way through to the worst end of conditions where all pedestrians become excluded. So that makes that whole diagram, and it's a kind of central diagram that's sat at the heart of a very, very much bigger piece of work we've been doing, which we're gradually going to be talking about in little, slightly more digestible chunks, because it's too big just to put out as one thing. And just to talk a little bit more about the standard design side of this, we, you know, as I say, it's a spectrum of design from compromise standard, where drivers are unlikely to obey the highway code, all the way through to a situation where they're unable to. And I'm going to show you 3 images of junctions which are probably at the better end. So moving on to the point where they might be getting towards pedestrian friendly, but not quite there. And that would be, you know, something like this, which is, you know, there are some positive features here for pedestrians, but it's still a design where it's very unlikely a driver is just going to give way and allow a pedestrian across. It's not impossible, and, you know, it may well be that some pedestrians get priority here, but certainly it's not going to be most of them. Likewise here, some quite positive features, but again, not quite all the way through to the point where drivers are going to actually be very likely to give way. And likewise there. So these are all probably junctions that sit at the standard side of things. So then we look at kind of what might be pedestrian friendly design. So into this much better standard. And we've had to think, Mark and myself, about what that would take. So what are the various factors that can add together to create a much better behavior from drivers, much higher priority for pedestrians? And there's a whole long list. We're hoping to stick a blog post out quite soon, which has got, you know, some details about that. But there's some items on the screen there. Some of them are pretty obvious, like the speed that vehicles are turning is pretty obvious, but there are some other factors in there that are not necessarily so immediately obvious, like the level of through traffic. So the level of traffic which is going past the end of a side road but not turning in has an effect on what it's like to cross that side road. That's kind of, once you start thinking about it, it's obvious, but it's not, it doesn't jump out at you. Equally, the speed of vehicles passing the end of a side road has an effect on what it's like to cross that side road, even if those vehicles aren't actually themselves turning in. So there's a whole bundle of things there. Essentially, what we end up being a couple of the really important things are that work to start to think about design which brings this level of pedestrian friendliness, the level we're talking about, it's not possible unless you start thinking about the whole traffic network, because you can't just drop those designs in anywhere and expect the system to function. It's a more complicated task than that. So this work goes alongside work to look at neighborhoods and areas which have low levels of traffic and low vehicle speeds. And importantly, some junctions might not be able to continue to sit as a priority junction. And a proper assessment to move things forward may well identify that a particular junction has levels of traffic which are too high to be a priority junction that's pedestrian friendly, and that therefore it becomes necessary for that to be a signalized junction or something else. We are interested, obviously, that the Active Travel England has, in the last kind of week or so, published information that about kind of critical safety issues for walking and wheeling and cycling, and that starts to identify, at least to some extent, what levels of traffic in and out of a side road they're thinking about as being definitive in terms of conditions for pedestrians. We have thought about what arrangements might exist for pedestrian friendly junctions. you know, within that pedestrian-friendly category where drivers are likely to give way. And we're identifying that there are 3 potential arrangements, which we're labeling here as a pedestrian-friendly marked priority junction. So where there's still priority marked with give-way lines. A no priority junction. So that would be something like what you see in the middle there, where no road has priority over another. And that's obviously, the drawing there is a very slow speed, very local roads, and a continuous footway. I'm just going to talk briefly through those arrangements. So for a pedestrian-friendly marked priority junction, what's really relevant in that diagram you see there is that the design increases visibility substantially so that drivers can see pedestrians and pedestrians can see drivers, and that people aren't having to peer around parked vehicles. That pedestrians who are using and needing to use the dropped curbs get an easy and direct and straight access across the dropped curb. You'll see those dropped curbs slope in the direction of travel rather than what we have on typical British dropped curbs, which there's the slope towards the major road. And the overall geometry of the junction is tightened down to such an extent that it becomes impossible for people to drive too quickly. This kind of junction design physically slows people down, and having slowed people down, that makes it much, much more likely that they become inclined to allow people to cross in front of them. Likewise, for the no priority junction, what we're looking at is streets which have equal status to one another. You can see what we're doing with that junction. That's effectively taking exactly the same street arrangement as we had in the previous example, but just changing the way the carriageway is designed. So those 3 carriageways are coming together in a way that makes it very clear that nobody has the straight through road. And the overall geometry here is very similar to the geometry of the previous junction, which is going to radically slow speeds down. And then likewise on the continuous footway, but we need to be really clear when we're talking about continuous footways, we are talking about a situation where a lot of people are using the phrase continuous footway to cover a lot of different arrangements which don't meet the kind of standards that Mark and I are talking about. So if you like, we're talking about continuous footways that start to meet the kind of standard of design that I spoke about in the work I did for Living Streets, where we were talking about a real continuous footway to kind of identify that as a different thing from the various hybrid, half-hearted or whatever arrangements that there are out there in Britain at the moment. So we're talking about something very specific, which doesn't actually exist very much on British streets at the moment in comparison to the more hybrid arrangements. We have here a great deal of clarity on, proper real continuous footway design, real clarity that the footway continues, and steep, sharp, high ramps, which are designed to slow vehicles down to a walking pace or something very close to it. And we have the equivalent geometry to what we were looking at in the previous arrangements, which is also slowing vehicles down to a very slow speed. Mark?
Yeah, just before we wrap up on this, there's a couple of questions coming which we'll pick up afterwards. I think it's important just to mention the one about are the roads two-way. They can be two-way. A lot of the work we've done has been looking at making them one-way and really squeeze things down, which goes back to the whole redesign of the geometry. And that's important to note because in some cases, because of the politics, because of people, how this stuff works, that's not always possible. But the key to this is really, really physically slowing everything down. So the drivers have to negotiate all of these junctions with an awful lot more care than there would be traditionally. So just have that in the mind as we go to the next slide, please, Robert. So we've been talking a lot about individual junctions. And some of the challenges that we often see, especially UK practices, let's go and do a corridor project and redesign all the junctions along a corridor. And the problem is if we decide, okay, here's a high street, we're going to drop in continuous footways and all the side roads here. And then for some reason, things don't work because the side roads are still too busy. There's lots of examples of this. Some of the cycleway schemes have kind of done these corridor projects, but not actually dealt with the traffic at the side roads. So we're still getting conflicts with pedestrians and cyclists. So there's a certain amount that you can do and you can get so far with it. But what you have to bear in mind is a lot of this stuff needs network redesign. So there's no point giving, you know, a consultant like me, go and redesign this junction and make it pedestrian friendly, because the question I'll ask back of you is, okay, what is the road network doing here? What's the major road for? What's the minor road for? What's the network doing? Because if you're trying to stuff HGVs through this side road, as H was talking about earlier, you're not going to be able to make it pedestrian friendly. You're going to have to do something different, either at network level, or you're going to have to accept priority junctions design is not for that location, do something else. So the graphic on the screen there that you've hopefully had a chance to have a quick look at, this is looking at what might happen at a neighbourhood level, and this is essentially a low traffic neighbourhood. The four roads that bound it, all reasonably large. The one at the right hand side is a trunk road, and so on and so on. And what we've done here is deployed lots and lots of the traffic management features that we've got available to us. So we've closed junctions, which deals with the problem completely in terms of vehicle to pedestrian conflicts. We've got some bus gates because there's bus services and we have to respect the need to get those around. But actually what this has done is got rid of all the traffic from the residential streets, which has meant all the little dots in green are the no priority layouts that that Robert just mentioned. There's a road up in the middle there which have the little red markers there for just marked priority. There's slightly different nuances going on in that location. A couple on the top there which are purple, simply because that particular road feeds a couple of cul-de-sacs, and there's nothing else you can do at the network level because it already exists as a cul-de-sac, so we can't deal with the main road there. So that's just a bit of the wider application, which is going to take another blog post at some point to try and explain that in a little bit more detail. So I think where we're heading with this is there's problems out there. Lots of people are out there doing experiments and freestyling and not really going back to first principles to try and work out what is the best we can do for our particular scheme. So we need to update the practice that we have here, just so we're starting to deploy things in a bit more of a standard way. Standard designs, as both Rob and I have mentioned going through, they do exclude a certain number of people. And if you go back to our wedge diagram, if you've got a full-blown wide bell mouth with lots of heavy vehicles blasting around it, that's going to exclude lots of people. They won't even travel there in the first place. So until we kind of confront that, and this goes back to the next point there about streets operating at the network level, there's lots of locations we just can't solve. If we click again, please. What we would like to say is thanks for Manchester City Council for leading the way here, because they are the only authority in the country who's even thought about that. And so hopefully, as the message gets out, a few more will start to pick this up. So hopefully we've kind of vaguely kept to some time there. Shall we look at some questions and some of the comments in the chat then, folks?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I can say you're ahead of my timings I had written down. So we've got lots of great time for questions. And thank you, Mark and Robert. I really enjoyed that presentation. And I particularly like the way you were able to visualize some of those concepts, as well as show us the junction designs. That's a method that really works for how my brain works. So thank you. I like that. And I'll be telling my team about it. Brilliant. So hopefully me having a little chat there has given people time to get their questions into the Q&A where I can spot them to read them out. I might miss them if they're in the general chat because it does bump around a lot. Right. So
I've picked up a couple of questions in the general chat that I can answer probably fairly easily. And one of the things here is obviously we are very quickly introducing you to a very large piece of work. So you will not have all the answers that you will want from us in the time we have available to talk to you. So you need to kind of keep in contact with us. There's more coming. There will be more blog posts and a whole chunk of other kind of other ideas to put down and to share with you. The question about the one-way streets is a really interesting one. In general, what we are doing is we're sharing images showing one-way for pedestrian-friendly junctions. We're sharing images of one-way streets because if people copy a junction which is a design which is really very tight and they think about just widening it a little bit to allow for two-way traffic, that's maybe still going to give you a good quality junction. Whereas if we start sharing, you know, junctions which are just at that boundary where they're only just meeting that pedestrian friendly standard, we think that people are going to copy that and dilute everything and be telling us they're creating pedestrian friendly junctions which aren't. And we've already heard, you know, had that from people a little bit on and off.
Yeah.
John Parkin, you asked a question about the tactile paving, the dumbbell kind of on the continuous footway. For those of you that have been part of conversations about tactile paving on continuous footways, the images we've been using have one suggestion for the use of tactile paving on them. But we've been very clear in the work with Manchester to say these are not our recommendations. They are just one suggestion for something we think might be a good way to work. And in line with the work that I did for Living Streets on this, we are being very, very clear that it's going to be absolutely essential that there is work fully involving blind and partially sighted people to come up with a national, consistent, agreed way of using tactile paving around anything like a continuous footway, so that we you know, as Mark and myself, we can't say here's the right way to do it, because what the right way is becomes about the agreement with blind and partially sighted people, and that doesn't exist at the moment, and it's essential that's created.
I think it's worth saying at this point that we've, you know, the images you've seen on pedestrian friendliness and the wedge diagrams have called it, we have set the bar extremely high, and taking that with the network redesign that I mentioned at the end, it's absolutely fine that you can't redesign the entire network overnight. It's taken us 100 years to get where we are today. So there's going to have to be locations where we do things now as best we can, and then we do something again in 10 years' time, whatever. It's going to take some iterations. The example I've given previously is, if you've got a budget, do you go and redo all the side roads on a high street that currently have decent drop curbs and tactile paving and put in a load of speed tables? Or do you go to the residential areas behind that high street, make sure they're properly filtered from through traffic, and then deal with all the drop curbs and tactile pavings in those, you know, in the streets behind the high street? Personally, I'd probably say do the latter, but the UK likes to do these corridor projects. They're kind of regeneration-led flagship schemes, and we don't get the basics right in all the side roads out there. So I think that's just something to bear in mind. And then a comment that has been made in the chat about we need things to be a standard rather than guidance. Standards really are, in civil engineering terms, that they're almost contract documents, and we're dealing. You can have some very strong guidance in terms of building new streets, but we're also trying to unpick 100 years of motorisation. So it's pretty much impossible to say, here is a standard design detail for a junction, we're going to pick up and drop it at every single location. So this is why we're talking about concepts that you have to adjust and tweak for individual locations. So it's not as simple as saying you must do it this way all the way through everywhere, because it doesn't work at the network level with that approach.
Thanks.
We've got some questions coming in.
Absolutely. I was about to say, Robert, have you answered all the things you had originally picked up from the chat?
Yeah, there's another one I spot in from Ruth in the last couple of comments, and it's just a question about kind of automatic cars and those, you know. So I think I'm going to broaden that to, you know, how does our work sit with the potential for innovation in terms of car design, automatic, what do you call them? Artificial intelligence, the word's going out of my head.
Autonomous vehicles.
Autonomous, thank you, Mark. So where does what we're doing sit with that? And I think one of the interesting things to talk about is how what we're looking at in terms of changes to the physical shape of junctions is not only about giving pedestrians physical priority over vehicles. There are also some very important changes that are about the shape of junctions and how they become or you know, more navigable for disabled people, people who are blind or partially sighted, even, you know, all the questions we have at the moment where pedestrians are forced to walk across tactile paving even if they don't want to, and even if it hurts them. What is it that you do to a junction design that uses the space slightly differently whilst still allowing vehicle traffic, so that people can avoid or work with the tactile paving in a different way to what we currently have as standard on British streets? What is it that we need to do to make those junctions so much more navigable for disabled people? So I think there are questions beyond just what we've talked about today in terms of the people giving way. That's just something that sits at the heart of the work.
Yeah. Thank you. Right, shall we mix it up a bit? Ruth, you can ask your question in person, and then we'll go to the Q&A and work our way through those. Ruth.
Thank you. It's very kind. Well, Mark knows because this is a pet one of mine, and Ruth Carlson, who's from LBC, not radio, I presume from Camden. Camden are doing very good work with their side road junctions, where they have what I call the slightly upstanding curb. So cars literally have to bump up to go across and bump down the other side. A new thing was put in at the end of my road to kind of slow drivers down turning into it, but it's nicely sinusoidal, so it doesn't stop them, slow them down at all. So your point about yes, side road traffic is too heavy, but if we are doing new designs, then surely there needs to be a standard for this kind of slightly upstanding curb, which does genuinely slow people down. And just to say, I just cycled along the Uxbridge Road in Shepherd's Bush, where all the drivers hurtle right to the very end, so they don't even stop for pedestrians. Then you're in a cycle lane going along, and they've kind of tipped over into the cycle lane because they're anxious to see the traffic. So there's nothing to slow them down at all. So
let's finish this up as a question.
the question is, can you not see that these upstanding curves, I don't know what the word is for them, would work in most places?
They wouldn't work in all places. So yes, there is so in the blog posts that Robert was talking about, there's going to be more information on some of the detail of the things we'd expect to see. So a classic thing that people say is, oh, just tighten up the curb radii. That's good, that's useful, that helps, but it doesn't massively deal with the speed issue. So there are lots of things that we can do, and the more of these things we deploy together at the same time will amplify their impact. Yeah, you'll have to wait for Robert's blog post on that one, which is soonish, Robert, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's getting there.
Very close.
Okay, brilliant. Let's move over to the questions that have come through the Q&A. I can read them out to you if you like. So the first one came from Sally. Sally got her MP to write to the DFT about poor publicity of the highway code, and they said this, the DFT. The percentage of road users reporting to know either a little or a lot about the highway code changes is at 70% among all road users and 82% amongst drivers, with 86% of road users having heard of the changes by September 2023. At this point, drivers' empathy remained consistently high, with 93% agreeing that it is their responsibility to respect and give space to vulnerable road users. And Sally asks, do you believe this?
Well, given that the majority of drivers think they're better than average, yeah, I think the word ends in "ollocks," but
I think we can all know the answer to that.
I think the problem here is, I mean, we think the highway code, what it's trying to achieve for this particular issue, is a really handy starting point, as we said before. Forget the highway code even exists. Here are three things: will drivers most likely stop, unlikely stop, or won't stop. If you think about somebody turning into, like where I live, my street is off a 50-mile-an-hour dual carriageway. There is no way on earth even the best driver that's conversant with the highway code is stopping with an HGV up their backside to turn left into my side road to let me cross. So I think we need to get away from rules-based approaches. They're fine, they're a foundation. We want to have a design-led approach in this thing.
Makes sense to me. Thank you, Mark. The next question from Martin, does this, and this being your fabulous work here, need to be embedded into national guidance so that we have a standard approach to treating streets? And I'm sure I saw a question further on, which might relate to this. Chris Boardman was very keen to trial side road zebras. Has anything happened about doing any trials by ATE? So that's from Kathy. I thought we could do those two together. How do we make these standards, and how do we get Active Travel England onto it?
I think from our perspective, Mark and I have done a piece of work for Manchester Council, which we think is really exciting, and I hope the more you learn about it, the more excited you will become about what we've done and about its potential importance for setting something up about how we should be designing our streets and our junctions across the whole of the country. We've been paid by Manchester Council. Oh, I should be clear, by the way, I wasn't absolutely clear earlier on that this work I'm talking about here is not for Living Streets. I work part-time for Living Streets, but this is work I've done freelance. I don't think Living Streets would be unhappy to be associated with it, but it's just to be clear. But you know, we've done work that Manchester Council paid us for, and we obviously hope that it gets picked up and lots of other people come to us for lots more work about this. And so, you know, do go and encourage people to talk to us about it. We don't have any power to make this a national thing. It would be nice if it does become national. It would be nice if, you know, as Manchester starts to explore this, that other people pick up on it and get excited about it. I think we should say that, you know, this has been work which, where there has been some very interesting work going on within Manchester to make sure that it involves people across what is, as in any local authority, a wide set of different professionals with a wide set of roles. So that's quite exciting, and I think that will have meant that the work spreads outwards as well. But yeah, can we make it national? Well, yeah, let's see.
Excellent. Okay. Somewhat related to this, Cameron asks, are you designing an assessment tool to ascertain where the issues are in an area and in the network? And I guess what I'm seeing here as well is that potential for campaigners and communities to start working with this type of tool to then feed that towards their local authority.
There's a lovely simple thing that you could do, everybody on this call, which is to take that idea. One of the reasons we started to talk about this by talking about the highway code rules is because if we are going to have safe streets for pedestrians, that's the standard of driving which is required. Because if you have a device which can kill people interacting with a person who is the vulnerable one who could be killed or seriously injured, you need to manage that. And we need a situation where if a pedestrian makes a mistake, as pedestrians are going to continue to do because human beings are human, if a pedestrian makes a mistake, the price they pay for that is not to die. And that is fundamentally that's what a safe system approach is. That's what something like Vision Zero is aiming at. A situation where if a pedestrian makes a mistake, the price they pay is not their death, and it becomes vanishingly unlikely that they die because of a mistake they've made. If that's the standard we need, and everybody pretty much is signed up to Vision Zero or some equivalent of it, if that's the standard we need, then we need a situation where drivers give way. Like there isn't another alternative. That's it. You can't have something which is safe if drivers can't stop and can't give way. So if we need that, then the question is how do you define what that looks like? And that's where that diagram comes in. That's where that idea of pedestrian friendly comes in, that something meets a measurable standard and you can go out and measure that. If you want to walk to the end of whatever local road you're near and you can see that pedestrians do not get drivers giving way, then that is by definition not a pedestrian friendly standard. If you find a junction of some kind and it's, you know, like a little tiny lane where drivers are giving way and you know, drivers tend to give way, most pedestrians get priority, then that is at a pedestrian friendly standard. So this is a measurable thing. So if we need that, it's very simple. We need that standard for people to be safe. We need safe because that's what we've all said. That's what everybody signed up for doing. And we've written down what that standard looks like, which is that pedestrians get priority. So, you know, thereafter, you get into all sorts of complex questions like, what are we going to do about all those junctions which aren't at that standard? And that's where we have to say, well, we can't signalize them all. We can't put traffic lights on them all because that's not a physical, practical thing to do. So perhaps we might want to put traffic lights on a few of them, but the ones that don't have traffic lights on, we're going to have to make them pedestrian friendly because there is no alternative if we're signed up for a safe systems approach Vision Zero. So the whole thing takes you round to say, well, the answer is that all of the junctions have to be pedestrian friendly, or they have to be signalized, or they have to be something that's not a priority junction, you know, that's in something radically different.
Okay,
It's like
right.
there's no other way through that.
Okay, but I think part of that question though is there a simple, some sort of tool or
Yeah, there's
something that helps you do
yeah,
that?
there's gonna be some more information coming out which talks about the physical criteria which you should be interested in, and the features that are more likely to help and less likely to help. It's not the sort of thing you can go out with a spreadsheet and give it a score, because that's incredibly difficult. But we will be starting off with, look, go out for yourself. You can get a feel of how this works, and it'll arm you with a way of talking to people about actually what needs to happen. But even if you had the you know, all the things we think are good, but you're still trying to stuff 10,000 vehicles a day through a side road, that's never going to be pedestrian friendly. So that you always have to go back to the network and the traffic flow and how that can be redesigned. I just wanted to pick up, there was the comment about the zebras being trialled. We think they have their place. We don't think that side road zebras are pedestrian friendly designs, because they rely on having to have the administrative rules of painting stripes on the street. Now, lots of people understand what they are, but they are still a rules-based design response. So we think that simple side road zebras probably are a standard treatment, but they may be towards the left of the standard design approach. Probably a controversial thing to say, but they're not as design-led as maybe continuous footway using the correct position or all the other things we've described.
The way to think about that question around the zebras is if we, you know, it's fine. We can think of places where adding a zebra might actually lead to better behaviours. But if the idea is that we're going to sort everything by painting zebras everywhere, I'm sure that everybody on this call can think of a whole host of junctions where it would seem crazy to paint a zebra and where nobody's going to comply. Because the way that the junction is designed just would not make it safe. It's a bit like when we look at some of the American streets and we have, as many people will have seen, great wide roads where pedestrians are encouraged to wave a little orange flag to get to make them more obvious as they cross the road. And that's a real thing there. And there are whole campaigns to get people to wave the orange flag better to make it more obvious that they don't want to die. And that's not, there are situations where zebra crossings are not going to work. And that brings us all the way back round to saying, well, we have to start to think about the whole network if we're going to get, get things to work for pedestrians.
Okay, thank you. Although I'm thinking back to a point that Mark made earlier of, where do you spend your limited budget and where do you prioritize when there's so much to do? So the zebras perhaps a interim solution for some junctions, better than nothing until you've got the ability to come and do all the design work you wish you could do. Wave the magic.
There is one thing we've not said, which is worth saying very, very quickly, which is the work we've been doing has looked at what can you do tomorrow if you've got a small budget to improve one tiny junction, and what should you be aiming at over many decades to come. So that's been one of the biggest challenges we've had in the work with Manchester, is to try to give them some support to look at both of those things. Both what do they do with a small budget and what do they do for it in the long term over decades, gradually changing, and what do they do with a small budget to change one junction that starts to move them towards the big stuff and doesn't move them away from it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Right, we've had a couple of questions on technical design things, so I'm going to batch this up a little bit so we can get through things. So we've got, does the no priority arrangement only work with one-way streets? Mark points out the biggest problem here is drivers moving forwards across the stop and give way line as they can't see around the junction. So that needs addressing. We've also got the majority of junctions are with the side road coming in at a perpendicular angle. Can a junction with a side road joining at an angle ever be pedestrian friendly, as the desire line distance to cross is extended by the angle? We've got, can you have the no priority junction with one lane at the junction, but in fact with two-way approaches? So we've got two-way approaches, perpendicular, drivers moving forward, and only one-way streets. What do we think about all of these things?
Goodness me.
In one sentence, off you go. Let me know if you need me to break it down.
I think so the starting point is looking at one-way streets because they're a way of managing traffic within an area. And it's keeping things nice and tight, nice and slow. We did debate whether we'd share some of the images with dimensions tonight, because as soon as we put a dimension on, everybody has an opinion about a dimension. So, but we did because they're there. But that's really, that's kind of a starting point. So there's whole issues if you're using one-way streets about, is the aisle width wide enough for oncoming cyclists? Because we say that you should maintain two-way cycle flow. Is the lane width in that dodgy zone of close passes for cyclists being overtaken? There's also dimensions to this where the fire brigade, if you followed exactly what they wanted, they would like a nice clear aisle width of 3.7 meters. So there's all these things pushing here, and that's always why maybe we shouldn't have put any dimensions on there. But you can do lots of this stuff in different ways with one-way or two-way streets. But the starting point is we've shown things as one way, really to tighten these things down, knowing that people will relax back from that. I think you said it earlier, Robert. If we started with a 7 meter wide two-way street, and somebody starts to make that even wider, they will do.
I can answer one of the bits of that question and very simply, which is that there are various people poking at the idea that you can have two-way streets, but with a junction where people have to wait for each other because it's only down to one lane. And yes, of course we can do that, and of course that is sensible, and of course that will only be sensible and will only work if you have low levels of traffic. If you have so much traffic that people are queuing and it's all getting, then that's not going to work. So that's why, again, we come back to the questions about network design, so that those junctions are something that work in quiet streets, but you have to use the network to create the quiet streets where those things fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What we missed.
The angle change, the angle change thing.
Yeah.
If what we're talking about here is a great big wide road with, traffic traveling along both streets at 30 miles an hour, then that's not ever going to be a pedestrian friendly arrangement. What you're going to need there is some other arrangement. It needs to have traffic signals, or it needs to be that pedestrians are completely provided for somewhere completely differently. We do have at the moment situations where pedestrians are asked to cross a great big wide two-way road where people can come off the major road at 30, or they could come off at 40 miles an hour if they wanted to. That's nowhere near pedestrian friendly. If you have, though, a junction like that in a residential area where you're actually aiming at 20-mile-per-hour streets or something equivalent, then you can start to change the geometries so that although the street pattern is with streets at awkward angles, actually the carriageways come together at angles that mean that people are going to slow down, and that's your way of solving it on slow speed streets.
And with the drivers creeping forward to see around the corner issue, I forget which slide it was, but there was a slide that was showing not only are we building the footway out into the side road, we're also building that footway out into the main road. So the give way point, if you like, is much further into the main road than it would be if you just left it alone. And we're not suggesting, unless it's maybe a continuous footway with genuinely low traffic going over it, we're not suggesting putting the give way line back as an indicator to give way to pedestrians, because if you actually go and read chapter 3 of the traffic signs manual, it says explicitly don't do that. So this is, there we go. Yeah. So where it says 3.3 there, if we'd had the give way point there, drivers are still going to creep forward. If you're having the position that you're having lots of queuing traffic queuing up even to the give way line on this junction, you haven't got the traffic flows down low enough for pedestrian friendliness.
It should be said that in the work I did for Living Streets on continuous footways, something became apparent that is kind of obvious once you think about it, but wasn't as we started doing the work. And that was that drivers don't stop at giveaway lines. That's not how it works. What happens is the way we understood it in the end was that somebody driving a vehicle understands the road markings, giveaway line or a stop line or whatever, as part of the indication that they need to give way to the main road. Really, nobody stops their vehicle at the line. That's just not what happens. It's kind of, people read it to mean, oh, I'm on the road that you've got to give way. That's the end of the road. They don't think of it that whatever the rules say, they don't actually think of it as that's the way they stop their vehicle. People stop their vehicle where they feel it to be sensible according to a whole set of circumstances, and that you can see those behaviours change according to the geometry of the junction, visibility, the presence of pedestrians, the size of the vehicles involved, and so on. Those lines never mark the point where people go, oh, I've got to stop here because, or hardly ever, because there's a line there.
Okay. We've got a few more questions, but I think we've really got to start wrapping up. So is there anything absolutely urgent here? A lot of these, I think, are some more technical details that I think will start to be covered in your blog posts and so on, so they can keep coming forward. But I think something that's a little bit different from technical details is, you know, how are the public reacting to this? So is this something that's
a really good question.
Yeah.
You're the public. This is the first time we've presented anything of this beyond technical audiences. Yeah, purely technical audiences. So hopefully, yes, okay, the knowledgeable public. Hopefully, it's useful. What I should say, there's two things I wanted to make sure we covered. I will put a set of these slides on my website because people can download from there. So it's cityinfinity.co.uk. It'll probably be under the community page. So I'll share those there, and I'll publicise that on social media. Another thing was just to remind Robert, if he hasn't already done so, he was going to post a link to find out more at some point when we get round to it. Because this is, I mean, it's taken us 8, 9, 10 months of work to get where we are today, and we've barely scratched the surface. There's a whole discussion about cycling here. So yeah, hopefully over the coming months, because a lot of the stuff now is just Robert and I trying to get information out there. We're not being paid for it now, so bear with us.
So that was my next question for you is, you know, what's next? And for those who are really excited about the work you're doing, we know we can follow, but how might they champion this work? How do we get this to be a thing now, not just an idea?
I'm in the middle. I'm trying to
speak.
Sorry,
Rob, you're concentrating.
I'm trying to think and speak at the same time.
Answer 5 questions and do 3 things at the same time.
Yeah. So I'm just sharing a link now, and I'll not share it till I write a sentence. But basically, Mark and I are aiming to run some of our own sessions to talk more about this, because there's only so much we can manage to explain it in half an hour or an hour, which is the kind of spaces we're getting elsewhere. So we probably will run something that's a half day or a day or something like that, which we'll need to charge a fee for, because otherwise we're just doing this as a hobby and it is actually our job. So I'm going to stick a note on the chat in any moment now. And if people want to sign up, basically what you're doing is you're giving us your email address just for that purpose. And we've promised people we won't use the email addresses people give us through this form for any purposes other than to say, here are some sessions we're running if you want to come to them. So there's that. The other thing is, as we've already said, really keep an eye on our websites. You'll see we're both, Mark and I, working very closely on this. So we'll be sending people backwards and forwards between the 2 websites to keep up with it. Partly we're doing it that way because we've got slightly different approaches, and we think it'll be quite nice to that you hear these things slightly differently from one of us and slightly differently from the other. But keep an eye on those websites for blog posts. You can get in contact with us through, if you don't have our details, certainly, I think you've got a contact form on your website, Mark, and I've got a contact form on mine that just emails me. So if you want to email me, you just fill in that contact form and I get a direct email, and I'll message you back if I get a chance. And yeah, there's only so much we can do. We're kind of working flat out on this at the moment. But
Brilliant. Okay, we shall wrap it up there. But thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really, really interesting session, and I'm seeing lots of applause. So I think everyone appreciated it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Active Travel Cafe this evening. And I'll give you a quick headline for next week's session. We will have Matt Smith from the University of Brighton and Beck Cedar from the Clare Project and they will be presenting an overview of the TNBI cycling project. So this will be exploring the benefits of and barriers to cycling for transgender, non-binary and intersex people in Brighton and Hove. So please join for that. And I believe there is then a second speaker, Heronia Cubos from the Universitat Autonomia de Barcelona, who will be discussing the LGBTIQ+ experiences of active travel, walking and cycling in Barcelona. So please join us next week for that. Other than that, have a great evening. Thanks, everyone. Bye.